We continue in Genesis chapter 11. In verse 5, we encountered God. God came straight down to see what was going on, as if he didn't know. And now we continue reading in verse 6 to verse 9. And here goes. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord, capital Lord, Jehovah God, scattered them abroad from there upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel or Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth. And from there did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. So, let's see what we can get out of this. In verse 6, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. In God's judgment, the main problem and the main cause of disobedience was the unity of the people. As you can see in the next verse, the most effective way to thwart unity would be to prevent the communication with each other. That's what I would do. So, God said next, nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. Wow. With this statement, there is an acknowledgement that something supernatural was in progress. Nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. You see, I believe with God anything is possible. But here, God wasn't even in the picture. And God even said, nothing will be restrained from them. So there had to be something supernatural going on. I'm quoting Mr. Henry Morris in his commentary on this verse in his Foundation Bible. Actually, yes. Nimrod. Now this is Mr. Morris speaking. Nimrod, with direct access to demonic intelligence and satanic power, would be invincible without divine intervention. Well, this divine intervention had to be God, right? No doubt there was a faithful remnant, Noah, Shem, but they were helpless without God's action. This was a quote from Henry Morris in his Defender Study Bible. Now, You need to understand that Satan did not want anything that God wanted. God wanted them to fill the earth. And Satan said, they're going to stay in one spot. Yeah. But now, God said something else in verse 7. It says, go to, let us. You see, back in verse 3 and 4, we have the same expression. Go to, and it was a Hebrew expression that implied there was a council making a decision. Here God says it, go to, let us, and it appears to be a decision made by a council or committee in heaven. Now, did he make that agreement with the angels? Some people think yes. But what better counsel, this is my opinion, what better counsel than a counsel within a triune God? Remember before in the beginning of Genesis, let us create. Let us do this. And here, go to. Oh, let's make a decision. Let us. Wow. God decreed the confusion of tongues involving God's divine creative power, which Satan could neither duplicate nor reverse. God recreated in our mind by altering brain, nerve, and speech processes in family units mentioned in chapter 10. In chapter 10, we saw the tribes according to their nations and their languages. And despite all this, they remained fully human, unchanged in their way of thinking and moral character. The only thing that God created was their language center in their brain. God, in his grace, still allowed the people to retain their autonomy, to retain making their own decisions. Many people still think that that was God's mistake. But I say no. God wanted people to make their own choice to follow him. God doesn't want robots. God wants willing participants to acknowledge his lordship and righteous kingship. Well, what happened next? The Lord scattered them abroad from there upon the face of all the earth. Whether they liked it or not, the inhabitants of Shinar were forced to obey God's command to fill the earth. The only family group that appeared to stay was Nimrod's tribe, who some people conjecture to eventually become the ancient Sumerians. And then we have, and they left off to build the city. What I get from this is that apparently the tower had been completed. Now we only have the ruins of that tower. But the tower appeared to have been completed and was actively in use. What it was used for, I have no idea. Maybe it was a massive apartment building. maybe it was a massive study ground, studying astrology and whatever, but it wasn't godly stuff. So the great metropolis was unfinished. They were going to build a massive city with its focal point as the Tower of Babel. So now people were in the process of being scattered into the various regions. Therefore, I'm reading this now from verse 9. Therefore is the name of it called Babel or Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth. The Hebrew word Babel means confusion or mixed up or nonsense. This is one of the very few words universally used. It sounds exactly like what the word means. To babble means to be incoherent, confusing, and generally meaningless. Now I know in the language I grew up in, sometimes we say, babbelt zu viel. He babbles too much. See? Babbles. And you see, in many other languages, we use the same word. To babble means to say nonsense. And I remember sitting in the back of the bus, and somebody goes, babble, 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 babble. Oh, my goodness. You know what? That's what they were saying. They were saying this guy was talking nonsense. So, to me, this word shows that without God's coherent presence, see, God scattered people in different languages. But you see, he wanted to make us more dependent on him, didn't he? Without his coherent presence. Coherence means coming together. Cohere. Without God's coherent presence, my life would also be incoherent and meaningless. Without God's discernment and guidance, I would just be babbling nonsense. You know, I'd be like a tall ship without a sail, just drifting. You know, I hope you got something out of today's study. Without God, we are nothing.